Hello and welcome to Hatched, the National Graduate Show 2020. My name is Miranda Johnson and I'm the Hatched Curatorial Fellow here at PICA. Artists are invited by their institutions to nominate for Hatched, and the final inclusion in the exhibition is chosen by a panel of industry professionals. This year, 24 freshly graduated artists from every state and territory in Australia are included in the exhibition. Hatched 2020 responds to powerful and timely themes related to ideas of community, care and family. We hope that this video walkthrough will give you some insight into the exhibition, whether you're watching from Perth or from afar. Ronnie Hodges is an artist from the ACT. In her work, she engages with her identity as a second-generation migrant of Thai, Chinese and Australian heritage. She starts with this motif of the Thai spirit house because they're really sort of central points for members of the community to come together and gather and share stories of your family. But for Emma, she's interested in thinking about family as an ongoing survival rather than thinking just about the past of ancestors. From here, she extends this idea of family and community into a living memoriam to her maternal family line. She uses materials that her grandmother donated as a dressmaker in Thailand. In Thai culture, these materials are seen as beautiful in their own right, but in Western culture, we might see these as kitsch or overly tacky and especially feminine. She uses these materials from her grandmother and mother as a way to reject the notion that she is caught between two worlds, trying to bring together elements of her identity from Australian culture and the migrant experience to create a unified whole. You can see there's a lot of images of her mother and her two aunts in a lot of the paintings. And she repeats words quite a lot as well, as a sort of a poetic sort of throwback to her family. So you can see the words love come up quite a lot, as well as she comes and she goes and she comes and she goes, right next to the element of the Thai spirit houses, which brings together this idea of a past family history and a survival into the future. Jody is a Yugara woman from Queensland, and this work was inspired by a visit to the Queensland Museum where she saw all of these coolamons from different Aboriginal cultures spilling out of archival boxes, and the way that they were all sort of jumbled together made her feel like there was no sort of museological or curatorial approach to thinking about the difference between cultures rather than Indigenous culture as just one monolith. So for her, she really wanted to think about the coolamons as an item of survival and diversity of Indigenous culture rather than a historical object that should be put in a museum. Coolamons are traditionally made out of wood, but for Jody, she wanted to use clay to bring it back to the earth and to the culture which sustains us. Throughout Aboriginal cultures, coolamons have a lot of different purposes. For example, agricultural practices, carrying children, or for baking bread. When her work was originally exhibited in Queensland, she sourced the sand from Yugara country. And here in Perth, we received permission from Noongar elders to source the sand from a women's business place on Noongar country. So in her work, she's really seeking to affirm the diversity of different Indigenous cultures across Australia, whilst also affirming their connections as a culture of survival and solidarity. Salahe Galami is an artist from Western Australia. In her work, she's really interested in exploring the experience of refugees and asylum seekers in indefinite detention. I think it's really important that the works focus on a suburban Australian backdrop as a way to remind the audience that these detention centres are in Australia and they are run by the Australian government. She uses these items, which to us might seem like everyday items, such as a ceiling fan, a table and a chair. In detention centres, these objects take on a new significance because they can be used as items of self-harm. Rather than explaining what is happening to these people, Salahe wants to explore this experience in a poetic and visceral way to explain the ongoing effects of trauma that is experienced by asylum seekers who have experienced indefinite detention. Truk's work is also concerned with second-generation migrant experience, but for Truk, part of her research was about thinking about the difference between first-generation and second-generation migrant experience. So these traditional lion heads were imported from Vietnam. You can see that the larger lion on the left is the tall, wise lion which represents her parents, the first-generation migrants, and the smaller lion on the right-hand side represents Truk herself, so the second-generation migrant. And you can sort of see in the difference of materials, the way that this sort of is like the younger migrant, and the materials were all kind of used from Truk's own clothing, so you can see a lot of like brand names and that sort of thing. So the banners show the 3 different scripts of Vietnam. So there's the pre-colonial script on the left, obviously English in the middle, and the post-colonial script on the right-hand side. So these items were dyed using bleach in a way to sort of reflect the experience of assimilation that a lot of migrants experience. So you can see the bleach sort of turned the fabric partially white in some instances, but it also partially destroyed that fabric. So it's about thinking about how assimilation can take things away and really damage someone. So Michelle Vine is an artist from Queensland. So she has a neurological disorder, which means that her senses don't experience the same way that we might expect. So for Michelle, she uses touch as a way for us to sort of disrupt this primacy of sight in the gallery. Touch for Michelle is really personal because it's one of the senses that she feels like is the most reliant for her and the one that she always relies on to understand the world around her. So these are all found objects. You can see that they kind of span from over here. There's a lot of sort of things that you might find in your shed or in your garage, and then it moves through to kitchen, living room sort of items, and then ends up in the bedroom. So it's about her sort of going through her house, finding these everyday objects and thinking about ways in which she can make them a little bit different and make us experience them in a different way to sort of delight and surprise the senses and remind us of how to use our senses beyond what we would normally expect things to feel or things to look. This artwork was particularly interesting to have in the gallery during this sort of COVID period, because the point of these works are really to be picked up and for gallery visitors to touch them and rub them on their face and rub them on someone else's face with consent, but unfortunately that's not possible due to coronavirus. So we've put a little video in the middle of, so this is a video that Michelle made from her graduate show, and it shows people engaging with the items in the way that they were originally meant to be engaged with. So we hope that people can use their imagination and imagine how these items might feel. Affirmation Tub sort of expands this idea of touch onto a full body scale. So the initial idea is that you could get into the bathtub and you would hear these beautiful whispered affirmations coming into your ears. Again, unfortunately, that's not possible, but if you lean over the tub, you can hear the affirmations coming out from within the faux fur to sort of gently remind you to relax and that you're loved and to be happy. So again, it's experienced in a slightly different way, but we hope that it's still effective. Thank you for watching the first part of this video walkthrough of Hatch 2020. So as you can see, there's a lot of very diverse practices on display in this year's exhibition. So in the next iteration of this video walkthrough, we'll be heading upstairs to see the rest of the artists.